Inclusive growth has become an increasingly attractive development paradigm for the modern global economy. Across the globe, aided by information flowing at broadband speed, the poor, the marginalized, the disenfranchised have organized themselves and clamored for change, sometimes toppling regimes, or at the very least forcing those in power to take a closer look at the way our respective milieus have previously distributed wealth and opportunities. Their message: while high rates of economic growth and increased trade and investment remain necessary, these are no longer the sole measure of success for a progressive society. The challenge for governments has deepened. When in the past, we gravitated towards metrics that reflect merely the wealth collectively amassed by an economy, more and more the task of governments has become ensuring that this wealth is not concentrated in the hands of the few, but rather that it is equitably utilized to raise levels of human development. In this manner, we engender a situation wherein the broader base of society can benefit from opportunities opening up through economic growth. Without these factors, a nation may perhaps experience periods of cyclical growth. Any progress, however, will be prone to disruption. Because so long as a society has reason to clamor for change, whether due to a pervading sense of inequality, injustice, unfairness, or lack of opportunity, it will find ways to do so. This perhaps offers some insight into the question posed to us today. Why does inclusive growth matter? First, inclusiveness matters because it ensures the stability of societies and consequently the sustainability of growth. The equation for sustainability is also integral to a second, perhaps more important aspect. On top of fostering stability, social inclusiveness also empowers citizens to become bona fide economic actors that can productively contribute to nation building. It allows them to buy into the system from which they can reap benefits. Perhaps a few examples arising from my country and our ongoing strategy can help concretize this idea. For the past 3 years, we have increasingly focused our national budget on social services such as education, health, and poverty alleviation. Our flagship Conditional Cash Transfer program now benefits close to 4 million families, and we have further expanded this so it may cover families with a child in high school. The only condition in this Conditional Cash Transfer program, or the primary, is to keep your child in school. A recent research by the Philippine Institute for Development Studies says that there is a 40% increase in income for those who finished high school versus those who were mere elementary graduates. Furthermore, we seek to educate students even from far-flung and even nomadic communities through our alternative learning systems, wherein our public school teachers are embedded in these communities to provide basic education services. Add to this, we are well on our way to closing resource gaps in terms of classrooms, even as we have already eliminated backlogs for textbooks and armchairs in our public education system. This on top of a recent law expanding our basic education cycle from 10 to 12 years, which we foresee will increase the competitiveness of our graduates in the global arena. I also signed into law 2 bills that have languished in Congress for many years, not least because of intense lobbying from entrenched interests. The Responsible Parenthood and the Reproductive Health Act, which mandates access to information and family planning, and the Sin Tax Reform Act, which earmarks increased revenue from tobacco and alcohol into health services. This will certainly accelerate our universal health care agenda, which we continue to aggressively pursue. These are direct government interventions that we are pursuing as a proactive way of encouraging the equitable distribution of wealth. Part of a concerted plan to ensure that all sectors take part in economic growth and partake in prosperity that it brings. Our task, to ensure that our people have the wherewithal to utilize and indeed maximize the opportunities opening up with the newfound revitalization of our economy. In the Philippines, where urban development and industrialization have historically happened in pockets, even as the greater segment of the poor remain in rural areas, we have also exerted much effort in empowering sectors that will have the greatest impact as regards inclusiveness, namely agriculture, tourism, and infrastructure. We have continued to pour funds into agriculture, streamlining the supply chain and providing much-needed support for our farmers. When in the past, our leaders have imported more rice than we needed and at exorbitant prices, today, because of good and prudent governance, the Philippines is well on its way to achieving rice self-sufficiency. You have also perhaps heard of our flagship campaign for our tourism industry. I invite you all to witness for yourself that indeed it's more fun in the Philippines. You will see that the entire population is living out this slogan with pride, bolstering both foreign and domestic tourist arrivals towards unprecedented highs. Our infrastructure agenda has likewise been a boon to both the agriculture and tourism sectors. Farm-to-market roads have begun to make previously isolated areas in the hinterlands accessible. A convergence strategy among national agencies has provided a framework for the construction and repair and enhancement of airports, roads, and other necessary infrastructure. Once completed, this will connect different hubs in the country in the most impactful way possible. On top of creating jobs through construction, these new infrastructure projects build an environment that is highly conducive to investments, all of which, coupled with our efforts in education, health, and poverty alleviation, spur a virtuous cycle of growth, empowerment, and equitable prosperity. In all cases, the integrity of public finances and resources from which government intervention is sourced must be protected. The Philippines has had an unfortunate history of corruption and non-transparent governance that had stunted the influx of opportunities and stifled the government's ability to execute anti-poverty strategies. In the last 3 years, significant gains have been achieved in weeding out corrupt officials, instituting more open governance and participative attack, and eliminating leakages in the system. In many ways, however, this task will continue to be a challenge in the years to come. I believe that such challenges need not only a whole of government, but rather a whole of society approach. We have already impressed our commitment onto partners in the legislature, the judiciary, and the subnational or local governments. They now realize that the people will settle for nothing less than honest, accountable, service-oriented governance, and that we in the executive are squarely on the side of the people. The private sector and international business community likewise have important roles to play in making economic growth more inclusive. On top of responsible practices, businesses must also actively engage with the community base, exploring new pathways to create opportunity and benefit for all. Practices that sacrifice long-term sustainability for short-term gain through an untenable extractive approach to resources or through creating tension between industries and communities must be revisited and changed. In sum, the question of inclusiveness is one that strikes at the very essence of growth. Do we define growth as the mere amassing of wealth, the mere swelling of the gross national product regardless of who benefits? Or do we decide and abide by the principle that the strength of nation lies in its people, that the fair and just way forward, indeed the only way forward, is for government to ensure that the system allows for equitability, where every citizen, regardless of status of birth or personal network or circumstances, is allowed the opportunity to shape his destiny through his own ability and hard work. This is the crossroads that every economy, indeed the entire global economy as a collective, has come to face. And I'm confident that collectively too, as humanity always has, we will rise to this challenge. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I think that's kicked off a really nice set of insights into what these two countries have done to try and promote inclusive growth. Before I open up to the audience, I just want to pose a question first to President Humala in terms of sharing his insights as to how progress could look in the coming years, because one of the most dramatic changes in Latin America is how much inequality has fallen as growth has sped up. But there are a number of economists who are concerned that as the commodity boom eases, that growth is slowing, and there are now more protests in these countries as to whether or not this progress towards cutting inequality and poverty will continue.
Bueno, a ver, en América Latina
In Latin America,
hoy día no es la
Latin
región
America at the present time
más pobre del
is
planeta,
not the
es una
poorest
región
region in the
emergente
world.
del
It's
planeta,
actually an emerging
al igual
part of the
que
world.
países del
Just
sudeste
like
asiático,
Southeast Asian
en
countries,
época de crisis vienen
when there is crisis,
avanzando en un crecimiento económico
they
sostenido,
continue to
en
grow
procesos de consolidación
and
de
they
sus sistemas
consolidate their
políticos
political
a través
systems
de la democracia
through
y las buenas
democracy,
prácticas de los
good
valores.
practices of their values.
Pero hoy
However,
día América Latina tiene el
presently
reto
Latin America faces
de
the challenge
utilizar
of using
esta buena
this
etapa
good
económica
economic
en lo
boom
que es el desarrollo de
and
los pueblos,
to
porque no es la
turn
primera
that
vez
into the
que
development of
América
its people. It's
Latina
not the
ha
first time
tenido
in history
crecimiento económico.
that Latin America has experienced
Hemos
economic
tenido,
growth. We did so
otras veces hemos tenido crecimiento económico,
in other
pero ha sido
times, but
ni bien terminado el crecimiento económico,
once the
otra vez
economic growth
entramos
was
en la línea
we
de la pobreza y
once
de los
again
problemas que esto
face
trae,
poverty
inestabilidad política.
and political instability, which
Yo
is
creo
an
que hoy día
outcome of
el reto que
poverty.
tenemos es
I
cómo
think that the
utilizamos
challenge we
este
face
crecimiento
now is how we
económico,
use this
que
economic
no es una
growth,
finalidad,
which is not an end in
simplemente es un
itself,
instrumento
but it is simply
para
an
poder
instrument that
corregir las
will
brechas
help
de
us to
desigualdad.
correct the
América
inequality gaps.
Latina
Latin
tiene
America
retos en lo que es
faces
infraestructura,
challenges
en lo que
in
es
the
conectividad,
field of
en
infrastructure,
lo que
connectivity,
es
in the
educación
areas
y
of
salud,
education and health,
en lo que es
in
llevar el agua
taking
para las familias
tap
del campo.
water to the
Y
families
América
living in
Latina, por
remote
otro lado,
areas. Latin America, on
es
the other
una
hand,
región
is
muy
a
rica
region
en
that is
recursos naturales,
quite wealthy in natural
minería,
resources. We have
petróleo,
a lot
gas,
of mining,
etcétera.
gas,
En el caso del
oil,
Perú,
and so on.
ya
In the case of
aterrizando en el
Peru,
Perú,
and
el Perú
specifically
tiene
talking about Peru,
uno de los mares más
Peru
ricos del
has
planeta,
one of the richest
tiene
seas in the world.
66% de su territorio es
66% of its
Amazonía,
territory
tiene
is
la
the
cordillera de
Amazon
los
region. We
Andes, que
have
está
the
llena de
Andes
minerales,
Mountains full
y tiene la costa
of
peruana,
minerals,
que
and
hoy
the
día es
coast of
un
Peru
boom
is presently
agroexportador.
an agricultural boom from which
Nuestro
we
reto hoy
export
día es que
different
todo
products.
eso se
Our
distribuya y
challenge
se
today
redistribuya
is to
en la
ensure
población a
that
través de
all
una
of this
política
wealth
social.
is
Para mí,
redistributed in our
más
population
importante
through a
que el
social
crecimiento
policy.
económico
For me, more important
es
than economic
qué se
growth
hace con ese
is
crecimiento
what we
económico,
do
la
with that economic
redistribución de
growth.
ese
In other words, the
crecimiento económico
redistribution of
que
that economic
permita
growth that will
darle oportunidad
allow us to
a los
offer
que hoy día no la
opportunities to
tienen.
those who presently
Creo que
do not have
nadie
those
que haya
opportunities.
tenido éxito
No one who
puede
has been
decir que se ha hecho
successful
solo.
can say
Todos
that
en
they were
algún
successful
momento
on their own.
hemos
At some
necesitado
point in
una
time, we
oportunidad.
all
Hoy día
needed
en
an
América
opportunity.
Latina hay
Nowadays
millones
in
de
Latin
jóvenes
America, there are
que
millions of young
probablemente
people
no alcancen
who
el
may
éxito porque no
not be
tienen
successful
oportunidades.
because they are not given that
Esa es
opportunity.
una
This
responsabilidad
is the
moral
responsibility,
de
a
todos
moral
los gobiernos.
responsibility of
Para eso
any
nos eligen.
government. That's what we
Nos
have
han
been
elegido,
elected for.
tiene una finalidad
And we
que es
have
la
a
de
goal
generar
to
oportunidades para los
generate
ciudadanos que nos
opportunities
eligen.
for
Creo que
those
ese es el
citizens
norte de
that
la
are
clase
electing us.
política.
I think
Y
that
para
is the
esto,
goal of
con
any
este crecimiento
political
económico,
class. With this
tenemos que
economic
reformar el
growth,
Estado,
we need to reform the
tenemos que
state.
crear
We
un
need to
entorno
create
positivo
a
para las
positive environment
inversiones,
for investment.
tenemos que
We need
trabajar
to work
ensambladamente de
in
manera
an articulated fashion
coordinada con el sector
with the
privado,
private
con las
sector,
grandes empresas,
with the big
para que
companies,
inviertan
so
y
that they
también
can
ellas
come in and
asuman
invest, and in
una
turn
responsabilidad
they
social
can
positiva con su
implement their
entorno.
social
Y de esta manera,
responsibility in their
la
areas of
inclusión social
influence. In
será
this
un
way, social
mecanismo de
inclusion
armonía
will
entre
be
la
a
política
mechanism
económica
that
y la
will
política social.
harmonize the economic policy and the social policy
Thank you very
together.
much, Mr.
Muchas gracias.
President Aquino, can I pose a question to you, which often gets asked of an Asian leader, which is, when you think about having an inclusive social policy, Asia has always had a fairly small state relative to Europe, which has a much bigger social safety net. If you peered into your crystal ball and you looked at this emphasis on inclusive growth, will Asia in the future go down the route of more of the Europeans having a comprehensive social safety net, or will it become more like the Americans, where it's a smaller state, but more private provision?
I think if one is concerned about continued growth, if one is concerned about stability, prosperity, and the whole menu, if we neglect to look at the individual as an effective partner, then we are doomed to failure. So there might be pockets in the way perhaps Asian economies have had to go to various stages, wherein a few really benefited from the boom, and everybody was just had at the best a little amelioration of their present condition. So the way I'd explain it to some of our, shall we say, more conservative and more market-oriented businessmen was, if you look at our countrymen also as consumers, if you keep their wages at such a level that they barely make out an existence, how do they turn into your customers? And by doing so, and by engaging in such a, shall we say, a short-term perspective of profits for the next quarter rather than profits for the decades to come, we continue that process whereby you continue to limit your market is self-defeating. But turn them, give them the education, get them to participate at higher ranks in the labor sector, for instance, give the provisions for microfinance, amongst other things, so those entrepreneurs who are able to do so, then that is actually an investment in your own growth. And so, in direct answer to your question, in our country we started with about 63% enrolled in our national health insurance program. We're at least about 84% or 86% at this point. The remaining percentage comprise the informal sector, which by definition has no permanent address, which makes it a bit difficult to capture them into the system, but we're also getting into that level already. I mentioned the alternative learning systems, amongst which will be to go to communities that are nomadic by lifestyle who are in the mountains and who actually have teachers already embedded in their communities to continue the education to reach out. At the end of the day, a more empowered citizenry is a partner for political stability, is a partner for economic prosperity, and is a partner for a future better than what we found.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. President. The floor is open. If you would like to pose a question, a microphone will come around. If you raise your hand and wait for a microphone to come around, I'm going to take a group of 3 questions. If you could first introduce yourself and then say who you would like to answer your question. And because we're short on time, I'd be very, very grateful if you kept your questions on the brief side. So more question, less a speech. I see a hand right here in the front. There's a microphone coming to you, I believe.
Mr.
Obama is not attending to this meeting. I heard that it's because of 2 reasons. First, it's because of the shutdown of the government. Secondly, it's due to a lot of people are looking for him, and he doesn't know how to answer your questions. As a president of the Philippines, how would you not cause any headache to these 2 leaders? And secondly, how do you implement inclusive growth?
President Aquino, I think that question was for you, and it has to do with President Obama not coming to the APEC Summit, and a couple of explanations. One is that he has a U.S. government shutdown, and that's why he couldn't come. The other reason is that perhaps he has a few issues with leaders in the region, and if you could help smooth over some of his attempts to increase America's presence. The questioner wondered if that was something that would be possible for you personally to do.
To do for President Obama?
Yep.
I think I'll have to agree that President Obama has to attend to government shutdown. The U.S. economy is the #1 economy in the world. What happens there affects all of us. And there are various estimates of how much losses conceivably can happen for both the American economy and the world economy. The world economy obviously is not in a position to withstand too much shocks at this point in time. We are just recovering as a global economy. So we perfectly sympathize. The Secretary of State is present, representing him. President Obama called us up. He's supposed to visit Manila after all of these trips in the region. He explained why he couldn't do it. And fortunately, I was in America in one of these government shutdowns where I had my father to explain what that means precisely. So we perfectly understand the situation. Stability in their economy promotes stability for the rest of the world's economy. And that is something we need if we are to make a better life for all of our people.
Thank you, Mr. President. Let's take another question. There's a question over there.
Liu Dongguang from Taiwan. This is for President Aquino. I remember back in the early 1990s when I went to Philippines, to Manila, I felt a lot of fear. And there were all these black taxis called golden taxis all over. But since you've gotten to become president of Philippines, the economy has had an incredible transformation, and now you're defying all these Asian economies. Your Philippines is growing 7-point-some%. Filipino people have a lot of confidence. But the thought that occurred to me was that the government of Philippines, the president of the Philippines, is that you can only be elected for one term. And I wonder if you could maybe talk to us as to what may be things that are good about a one-term presidency, or maybe what are about a two-term presidency, and as to how can you ensure that the growth continues in Philippines. Thank you.
President Aquino, I think the question really is, if you could seek a second term, would you be setting yourself to do so?
Probably not. but perhaps I'll try to answer in about a minute or so. Where does that provision come from? We had the president who got first elected in 1965, got re-elected in 1969, and decided to stay until 1986. And our Constitution limited terms to 2 4-year terms. What is the best reason for a one-term presidency? There are decisions, especially for an emerging economy like ours, an emerging country like ours, that may not be politically, so to say, palatable or politically correct, but are necessary. My father used to say that when in the pre-martial law days, this was before 1972, if they had to raise 5 centavos, excuse me, if they had to raise fuel prices by 5 centavos, you would have nationwide strikes. It was practically difficult to govern. Now, you can make an unpopular decision right now, but it's necessary for the future good. And you are not worried about the next election. Whereas if you are concerned about the next term, everything you do has to be in the backdrop of how to secure your next years in office, which probably will be such a temptation to any leader to try and please the people all the time, regardless of whether or not it is good. So what we did in the past, what our theory is, give our people an experience of what good governance is. Good governance leads to good economics. And the good economics now enables us to address disasters, even natural disasters, without sounding like the world's beggar. You know, we are able to address our needs in a very rapid fashion. For instance, the devastation that happened because of the rebels in Zamboanga City. We have funds already set aside that will rebuild the communities of people who are about 100,000 or so into a better planned community, which will conversely have a better future than what it was from when we started. Now, beyond 2016, the belief is if our people are so used to this type of governance, then whoever will portray themselves or will be believed as continuing the policies we have set will be the one to get into office. So at the end of the day, our mantra is the bosses ultimately are our people, and they will decide, and they will choose the person and the entity that will hopefully continue the policies that we have instituted.
Question in the front there.
This is Carlos C. from Newcomer Group in China. Question to Mr. President of Peru. As you know, China now is a bigger potential market for the world. And I want to ask you to share that how you as a president to support your Peru company to develop a China market. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much.
Nosotros lo que estamos haciendo hoy
What we
día
are
es
presently doing
el fortalecimiento de
is
las
strengthening
oficinas comerciales
our commercial
para
offices
buscar dentro de China
so that we
mercados
can find
para que
within
puedan
China
ingresar
markets
productos peruanos.
where Peruvian products
Obviamente
can
China
be
es un mercado
spread.
muy
Of
variado,
course,
muy grande,
China is a very
con
big
muchas
market, a
demandas, muchas
very varied
oportunidades.
market with
Y
a
ya
lot
hoy
of
día
opportunities.
algunas empresas
And
peruanas
now
están entrando
some
a
Peruvian
China.
companies are
Hemos
already
creado, además de eso,
present in China. In addition,
más
we have created
consulados
more
para
consulate
también
offices so that
ir dando
we can
información
provide
a tanto los
information
ciudadanos chinos como a los ciudadanos
to
peruanos de las
Chinese
oportunidades.
citizens and Peruvian citizens of the opportunities
China hoy día es uno de los socios
in
más
other countries.
importantes que
China
tenemos nosotros
is one of our most important trade partners.
En la región del Asia.
In
Hay muchas
Asia,
inversiones
there
chinas
are many
en
Chinese
Perú.
investments in Peru.
La balanza o el intercambio comercial con China es muy
Commercial
importante.
trade is quite
Hoy día es
important.
positivo para el Perú.
Today we have a
Pero
positive
pienso
trade balance
de que
for Peru.
ya hay
However, I
empresas
believe
peruanas que
that
se
there are
están
Peruvian companies that are
internacionalizando,
becoming
que están
international.
presentes en China.
They are already
Y lo que
present in
tenemos que
China.
hacer es,
What we
entre
just
otras
need
cosas
to do, among
adicionales,
other
es,
things, in Peru,
trabajar
is to
juntos
work
para
together
darle una mayor difusión
to
al idioma chino,
spread the
mayor
Chinese language,
información
to provide
de
more
todas las
information
oportunidades que
of
el
all
mercado
opportunities
chino
that the
brinda
Chinese market
a los
offers
productos nacionales,
to the
y
domestic
además de
market.
esto,
And in addition to all
mejorar,
of this,
fortalecer el
improve,
dinamismo
strengthen
del
the
Ministerio de
dynamism
Comercio Exterior y Turismo,
of
cuya
the
ministra
Ministry
está
of
acá,
Foreign Trade and Tourism, and we have
para
our minister here with us,
dinamizar y
actually,
facilitar
so as to
el
facilitate
ingreso de los productos chinos
and
y además
dynamize the
aprovechar los
arrival of
acuerdos
Chinese
comerciales que ya hemos
products
suscrito con
and
China.
take advantage of the trade agreements that we have already signed with China.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. We're pretty much out. We've got just a few minutes left, and I did want to give both presidents an opportunity to sum up with any final thoughts that they have had. For me, I thought it was the most enlightening session in terms of the commitment that I've heard towards broadening the scope of benefits from economic growth, which is something that both presidents have spoken very passionately about. So I'm now just going to go in reverse order and ask President Aquino if he could give us any final thoughts on this topic. And I'm also going to put you on the spot, Mr. President, and say growth, trade, quite important, TPP, big topic for Asia Pacific. Is this in your future as well?
Presently being studied with regards to TPP, but we will not distance ourselves from every opportunity that will give better opportunities and more opportunities for people. Talking to President Tumala earlier, one can't help but really be amazed at so many similarities between where they were, where they are now, where the problems are concerned. It just says, I guess, more than anything, that the human condition is really indeed universal. And if we are focused on all rather than self, then we will get somewhere. And if we do the reverse and focus on self, no, we will not even help ourselves, but we will actually ensure that we will never reach our own personal potential. So at the end of the day, focus on the other is the key to where we want to go.
Very much, Mr. President. President Humala, similar question in terms of trade orientation. Is your future the Pacific, the rest of Latin America, or maybe that country just north of you, that big one?
Yo creo que
I think
nuestro futuro está en la
that our
medida en que
future
el Perú pueda
is there where Peru
insertarse en los diferentes
can participate,
bloques
and Peru
económicos
can
comerciales que se
participate
vienen
in different
construyendo a
economic
nivel
and
mundial.
trade blocks that
Yo
are
le veo
presently developing
mucha,
in the world. I
importancia y
see a lot
potencialidad
of importance and
a
a
lo
lot
que
of
es,
potential
el bloque del
in
Foro Económico
the
Asia-Pacífico.
Asia-Pacific
Creo
Economic
que,
Forum.
por otro lado,
On the other hand,
los gobernantes no debemos olvidar
leaders
nuestro
should
origen.
not forget where we come
Que se
from.
crean
That
los gobiernos
governments
para
are
satisfacer las
there
necesidades
to
de
meet
todos,
the needs
no de
of
una
everybody and not
minoría.
just a
Y
minority.
en ese sentido,
In this sense,
recalco
I would like
que
to
el
highlight
crecimiento
growth
debe ser un instrumento,
must be
no
an
una
instrument
finalidad.
and not an end in
Y
itself.
creo
I
que
believe
el Perú
that
como
Peru
país
as a country
viene trabajando
has been working strongly
activamente insertándose
to
en
participate
los bloques
in
comerciales que hay en el
trade
mundo,
blocks that
pero
exist in the world,
siempre recordando
but
nuestro
always
origen. que para
bearing in
cambiar
mind
la
our
situación
origin.
de
In
desigualdad
order to change the
hay que
inequality,
trabajar
we
el
need
tema
to
de la
work
educación.
on
Hay
education.
que
We need to
trabajar
work
políticas sociales que
on
nos
social
permitan
policies that will enable us to
ese
redistribute
crecimiento
that
económico.
economic
Hay
growth.
que
We
invertir
need
en
to invest
infraestructura
in
para
infrastructure
que también
so as
las
to
zonas del interior de
get
nuestros
the
países
remote areas of our
puedan
countries
también sacar
to
sus productos a
bring
costos
their products
competitivos.
at
Hay
competitive
que
prices to the market.
modernizar el
We need
Estado,
to modernize
porque los
the
tiempos
state
cambian
structure.
y las
Times
pequeñas y
change,
microempresas
and
que son hoy día un
SMEs
motor
that
vivo
are
que
a
generan
live
muchos puestos de trabajo
engine
que
generating many
dinamizan nuestra
jobs
economía,
and making
ellos
our
también
economies
requieren
very
reglas
dynamic.
claras.
They also
Las
need
reglas que
clear
da un
rules.
gobierno
The
no solamente
rules
son
that
para
are
los
given by
grandes,
the
sino
government are not
también
just for the big
deben ser
ones, but they
útiles
should also
para
be
los
useful
pequeños,
for
para
those
aquellos que
small
recién se
ones, for
inician.
the ones who are
A
starting.
esos hay que cuidarlos
We
como
need
Estado.
to
Como
look
gobierno
after them
hay
as
que
a state, as
incentivarlos,
a government. We need to
promoverlos a
encourage
través
them
de
to
créditos, a
provide
través de
them loans,
capacitación,
provide them
a través de
training.
información
We
de
need to
qué es lo que
give
está
them
pasando en el
information
mundo,
on what's going
a
on
través
around the
de
world.
una serie de
We need
mecanismos,
to implement a
ventajas
number
que
of
podamos
mechanisms
darles porque
so
recién
that they
empiezan.
can take
Y
advantage
ese
of them. They are
es el
just
futuro de
starting,
nuestro país.
and this is
Por
where the
eso
future of our
yo
countries
estoy
rests. This is
tranquilo
why I
con
feel
la
quite
satisfacción de que el
comfortable
futuro
and quite
lo venimos
satisfied that the
construyendo
future
cada día
is
como
something
hoy.
we're building
Muchas
today,
gracias.
every single day. Thank you very much.
It's been my privilege to moderate this session with two brilliant presidents who have spoken passionately about inclusive growth. We're out of time, but please join me in giving them a huge round of applause for sharing their views with us.